On today's Transport Evolved, Michigan closes the door on the Tesla, the mid-price electric market hots up, and Audi sends a self-driving car round a racetrack really quickly. These stories and more coming up next on Transport Evolved. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode number 216 of Transport Evolved, recorded on October 26th, 2014. My name is Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield, as it says underneath, and I am your usual host into the world of future transportation. Yes, okay, we do have a bent towards plug-in cars, but if it's greener, cleaner, faster, and safer, we cover it here on the show. And joining me today, we've got two fantastic guests. I would like to call them old-timers. I would worry that they would be offended, but no, they know me. They know that I don't mean that. They are industry experts. They are pillars of the plug-in community and green car world. Please welcome to today for the first time, well, actually for a month, Chelsea Sexton. How are you today?
If I were any better, there would be two of me.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Also joining the show today, the wonderful Mr. John Voelcker from Green Car Reports and New York. John, I see that you have not succumbed to the hysteria that is your state right now.
No, and it probably doesn't suit us to get into the quarantining of people at airports who may potentially have been exposed to Ebola. What a lovely day it is out.
Yeah. Let me just say that that the world is watching, John, as I'm sure people are aware. I'm not sure that maybe the governors are aware that people are watching, but the rest of the world's watching and going, my goodness, I'm glad I don't live in either New Jersey or New York right now. Anyway, Chelsea, you've been really busy lately. John, you've been really busy lately. We are going to kind of throw ourselves straight into the show today, and we're going to talk about some of the things that have been going on in the world of green cars. However, for the second time, John, for the second time in pretty much a month, we are saying goodbye to someone today who we've held very dear in the plug-in vehicle community, haven't we?
Yes.
Pitt Moos, who was the one of the top guys working on the Smart for 2 electric drive program. I think it's probably the best way of describing him. Worked at Daimler for many years, right, Chelsea?
Absolutely.
Yep. Found out. I found out this morning. I think that the news has been around in the plug-in vehicle world. Pitt was killed tragically in a motorcycle accident a couple of weeks ago. So our sympathies go to him and his family. Not only the second death in the plug-in vehicle world this fall, but the second death on a motorbike. Pitt was an insider in the industry. He obviously worked for Daimler for many years, worked for on the Smart for 2 electric drive program. He first reached out to me when I was quite vocal about the Smart for 2 and said I didn't like it all that much back in the early days, and he promised me that the actual production version of this car was going to be fantastic, and it was a very good car. But the nice thing about Pitt is that he was very active on social media sites, and he would engage. He was one of the few sort of engineering sorts who would engage, and that made interacting with him a pleasure, and it also made for some very lively conversation, right, Chelsea?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Pitt was he was known to be very colorful to anybody that knew him. I got to know him even some years before you did, it sounds like, when they were just thinking about doing a smart electric drive. And times I have seen that man, I've never seen him not wearing leather pants. And he's very, very German, had the layer of sort of internal auto and German arrogance, and was sort of a little condescending, even though he was provocative and at least always willing to have the discussion. So we sparred a lot, always in a friendly way, but we sparred a lot. But one of the favorite stories of Pitt was when he was program manager for the Smart Electric Drive, and they decided they were going to call it the ED. And I had the distinct pleasure of trying to explain to him why that was not necessarily the best name for an American market and sort of the intonations that ED has. And his absolute straightforward first and blunt response was, well, can't we just tell them that German men don't have that problem? Which sort of perfectly encapsulates his candor and his attitude and his cheekiness. And yes, the conversation continued, but that was all Pitt.
And John, I mean, you met him a couple of times in your work at Green Car Reports. That sounds like the Pitt that I knew too.
Absolutely, I can only confirm that. I must have gotten him in a somewhat mellower mood. We sat down for about an hour and a half at an auto show. Sometime, I don't remember which one, sometime within the last 2 years, and really covered a range of things. And as Chelsea said, he was incredibly opinionated about all things, but he also had a lot of history and a lot of perspective, and he could look into the future, sort of past just the current generation or what they were planning and wouldn't tell us, and really see electrified transport playing out over a much longer period. And I think having not met him in person before, having met him on social media, I wasn't sure quite what I was going to get. And while he was what Chelsea said, I also found him a lot more reasonable than I thought I might. And he will be missed by lots and lots of people on social media, and certainly the industry as a whole.
Yeah. Just as an apology, John, your picture is doing this weird kind of flashy thing every now and then. I don't think it's anything at your end. I don't know if it's the connection. Let's just push on with it. But every now and then your image for a frame drops out and then comes back. So John is flashing today. Take from that what you will. And of course, our sympathies do go to Pitt and his family. And it does, I'm not going to go into my motorcycle safety rant, because a couple of weeks ago someone was actually quite cruel about the late William Courtoff on the show for that very reason. So I'm not going to do that anymore. But wear a helmet and be safe. Right, let's move on to slightly less down news, Chelsea. Maybe it isn't slightly less down news. You this week, Chelsea, have been up to your eyeballs in CARB, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
So we are gonna cover this. This is the first story that I want to ask you about, and it is essentially a hearing that was held on Friday. The Californian Air Resources Board, they are considering, and I think it is still considering, unless you're going to tell me otherwise, changing the regulations that govern the sale and production of plug-in vehicles in the state of California. Now, I'm being quite vague about this because I'm hoping that you're going to fill in the gaps and make it a little bit more applicable. But tell people what the ZEV mandate is as a bit of a background, and then maybe we'll look into why CARB is trying to change it.
Well, the ZEV mandate, or ZEV program, depending on who you ask, started in 1990. It has existed ever since. It's the same program and law that was discussed in Who Killed the Electric Car. It's actually never fully gone away over the years. It's just been changed over and over and over and over and over again. So the way that it is currently constructed is that all manufacturers that sell a certain number of cars in California have to participate to some degree or another. And at this point, the rules get more strict and more things are required as the years wear on, but basically everybody has to do something at this point. And instead of selling a certain number of vehicles, you have to amass a certain number of credits. And each type of vehicle gets a different number of credits, and you can sell a little bit of this and some of that, and have to sell some of these, but eventually you're trying to get to this total number of credits. And every manufacturer's obligation is different depending on how many cars they individually sell, and there's lots of layers to it. So the large manufacturers and Toyotas and Hondas and GM and Nissan all have to, they have to do more. Right. And then there's the second group of intermediate manufacturers, and it's Mazda and Volvo and Jaguar Land Rover and Mitsubishi and Subaru. And so, they are entering into a more strict phase of the law coming up. Right. And so the Thursday's meeting was primarily about their chunk. It was regular board meeting, but because so many little pieces of this program are changed all the time, every couple of meetings another piece goes to the board to vote on. So in this case, it was what should happen with these intermediate manufacturers. And the proposal from staff was essentially to cut their obligations roughly in half. Right. I mean, because it's wonky, you can debate it, but that was the gist of it. And to let them have a pass on building zero-emission cars at all, and to allow them to do their total obligation for a certain period of time, through 2025, with TZEVs, so basically plug-in hybrids is generally what that amounts to. And there were some other little aspects to it. They have to pass a certain revenue threshold before they're obligated, and all these different things. But it was this package deal.
Now, under the existing ZEV mandate, the number of credits that have to be produced by the large vehicle manufacturers has been it's been fairly static for the last couple of years. That's just about to ramp up, isn't it? So 2015 to 2018, and then 2018 it's going to get even bigger.
Right, and that's why everyone is sort of hanging on with bated breath. To this point, the program's still around, but it hasn't been particularly onerous, which is why we see compliance cars with volumes of 500 a year and that kind of thing. They just don't have to build very many things in order to get the credits they need. They also have the option to buy credits from other manufacturers, and we've seen that happen for years and years and years. One doesn't want to do a program, or they just need a few credits, or they do a program and they just don't quite get what they need in terms of selling cars, and so they'll buy a few here and there. So there's always been that going on as well, and there's some gamesmanship and always lots of interest in who's buying and selling and doing all of that. But it's important to note that this conversation was more of a big picture trend conversation than the individual number of cars here. There's lots of debate about, well, if we let them not build ZEVs, we're only giving up this many cars, we're giving up a lot of cars. And in the grand scheme, the number is not that significant. Dave Patterson from Mitsubishi had the best quote of the day by far as he was trying to put this in perspective. And he basically said, look, if you're looking at these little intermediate manufacturers in California, if all of the sales in California are the turkey dinner, we are the cranberry sauce. I mean, our submission to this is that insignificant in terms of actual volumes. However, there's a huge amount of interest and concern around lowering any vehicle obligations at all. So the debate was not around some of the other little stuff. It was more about lowering their overall credit obligations in general. Support for letting them have a temporary pass on the ZEVs, and the thinking there is a little bit, if you have some of these intermediate manufacturers that don't have huge resources, is it better, and using Mitsubishi as an example, to have them build a few iMEVs, as they have been, they sell 30 a month or something, or is it better to have them put all of their energy into something like the Outlander plug-in hybrid and really make a sincere effort instead of splitting their energy? Right. So there is some notion and some credence to, okay, for now we'll let you just do the one program you really want to do if you'll do it for real, and then as the years go on, you're going to have to also do some ZEVs.
Well, this is interesting because looking at this from a British perspective, we've got the Outlander plug-in hybrid really has just taken off in Europe. I cannot express how amazing that vehicle has been in terms of sales. It's just exploded onto the market. People want an SUV that is also a plug-in, that offers hybrid-like mileage on the freeway. People will, what's the average gas mileage, John, of a mid-sized SUV these days, crossover SUV? It's going to be 18, 19 miles per gallon, if you're lucky.
It might be a bit higher. It might be 22 or something now. But yeah, definitely they're not as fuel efficient as compact crossovers, which are the biggest segment by far.
And we're looking at, this is a vehicle which is, you know, a medium-sized crossover SUV. It's got seating for 5. Okay, it doesn't have the 7 seats that the gasoline version or the diesel version of this car has, but it's got a monster boot. I mean, by British standards, it's impressively large. It shoots, you know, in terms of size and capability. It might not have the off-road capabilities of, say, your Land Rover Discovery, but it's that similar size, and it's shooting for a similar-ish price. It's got the 4-wheel drive. It's not the most refined drive on the planet, but it's got CHAdeMO. You can drive around town in EV mode, and, you know, extended mileage, 50 miles per gallon, 60 miles per gallon. I've seen it go as much as, you know, 90 if you're really careful. And I can see the argument, yay, let's get Mitsubishi building these rather than just a limited production of a car that's really not suited for the American market and has been modified so many times now that there's very little of the original car left, the original Japanese car, certainly in terms of the original character. But there are some challenges, aren't there, John, with this ZEV mandate? Because it's not just California, is it? It's East Coast and the Pacific Northwest use the ZEV mandate to base their own electric vehicle market requirements and targets.
Indeed. I think it's called something like the Gang of 14 now. There are a number of other states that have adopted the stricter California emissions limits. And if I understand right, they were actually represented and spoke at this hearing as well, right, Chelsea?
Absolutely, and that's where it kind of became the most interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, for mostly procedural reasons, there's not enough advance notice on this or that, or need to do some more investigation into some wonky little bit, no decisions were actually made at the meeting. And yet, it was one of the more interesting meetings in a very long time, in part because manufacturers also teed up a proposal to CARB to revamp the plug-in hybrid portion and base it on what they call e-miles or EVMT rather than, you know, being a plug-in hybrid versus an EV. And in theory, it was, let's get more credit for these plug-in hybrids. And so it was Ford and Toyota and Honda and this up. And in part, it was like, oh, look how hard this is for us. And oh, our plug-in hybrids do as many EV miles as EVs do, although that remains to be seen. They based it on study, but half of their proposal shot themselves so much in the foot because while it was an underwhelming presentation anyway, they also very vaguely said, we'd like you to relax the rules because we're having such a hard time selling, particularly in the North, and their incentives are minimal, and they have no infrastructure, and, you know, there's some things that they could do and they're just not doing, but bottom line is it is just so very tough for us, these sincere manufacturers, that you should really just sort of start relaxing the rules for us in general. Lo and behold, those states was in the room as part of a press conference that they were planning on doing later, and they presented in the afternoon what their take was and what they were up to, and every single one of them was pissed off. Some more diplomatically than others, but the frustration from these other states about the industry, about not getting cars, about being blamed for low sales. You know, one stood up and very pointedly said, we have raised our state incentive from $1,000 to $3,000. I believe that's what California does. We have this many, you know, these many chargers and all these other things we're doing. And while Mary Nichols of CARB had in the press conference touted that there were 24 or 24 or so plug-in vehicles available in California, including motorcycles, this poor woman, Kathy Kinsey from Maryland, she said, yeah, and there's 4 of them in Maryland.
Right,
every one of them hammered on the lack of availability, both variety and volume, and the dealer experience. At which point, the CARB board members who had bought plug-in cars recently hammered on their own dealer experience, and it kind of a free-for-all about the industry's role and the dealer's role, and even Oregon was frustrated and expressed that there are 400 leaves available in Seattle, but 29 in Portland, even though it's the second best-selling Nissan in all of Oregon. So there's a lot going on there. And there's some frustration even with CARB itself, and some of it was private discussion, but there are certain tiny little bits of the ZEV program, one in particular called travel provision, allows automakers to put cars on the road in California and get credit for them in all these states, which means they're not sending the cars to the other states. So while on one hand they all want to play together and they appreciate the weight and the power that CARB brings to the table, you can tell that some of these smaller states are frustrated even with CARB and its own program because of how it impacts them locally.
And we've heard all kinds of excuses being given by automakers as to why, X, Y, and Z is not going to happen. Also, one of the things I noticed you tweeting, Chelsea, was something on the lines of, a positive outcome of this would be if we saw the credits being weighted towards plug-in miles. So at the moment, you've got car companies like Toyota who are bringing the plug-in hybrid, the Toyota Prius plug-in hybrid to market, which is, what's the EV miles of that? The pure EV is something like 6 miles, isn't it? Blended, it's 11. And that's kind of taking the mickey.
Yeah, and the Honda, I think, is rated slightly higher, 9 and 14 or something, but still, it is the most minimally electrified plug-in car out there. The Honda Accord is very popular, but in terms of quality, similar, 15 or so miles. The Fords are a bit better, and then the Volt is much more robust than the others. And the general premise of this e-miles thing would be, one would hope, that the more electrified plug-in hybrids would get more credit than the less electrified ones. And that happens a little bit, but not truly. And while most agree that there was some merit to that premise, not a single mention was made all day long of actually doing that. And that's where a lot of the concern lie. The Idaho National Lab data was interesting. It basically said, we've looked at 6 or 7 different EVs and plug-in hybrids. The EVs are driving 9,500 EV miles. The plug-in hybrids are driving somewhere between 2,500 and 9,000, depending on which one it is. So, the Volt basically is pretty damn close to a Leaf in terms of its EV miles, and therefore, this is proof. Well, it's interesting data. It was interesting conversation. There's also a lot of holes in it and whatnot in terms of sample size, in terms of the what cars were looked at, and the lack of longer range EVs and all of that sort of thing. So most agreed it was not enough to base a ruling on, but there's clearly going to be a push for plug-in hybrids to get more credit. And Dan Sperling went almost a little around the bend in his comments, because while many support the idea of plug-ins as transition cars, as EVs with training wheels, with all the benefits of potentially getting more people into plug-ins who are not currently okay with jumping straight to an 80-mile BEV, he said flat out, I would rather have 2 plug-in hybrids than 1 EV. Well, depending on which ones you're talking about, that gets a little dicey. And Mary Nichols immediately came back and challenged him, and they got in a little bit of a debate for a moment. So it was colorful.
If you want to see, Chelsea's tweets from the event, she was tweeting during the meeting. Do go to twitter.com/EVChels, because the tweet stream's still there. John, to kind of wrap this up, the skeptic in me would look at this list of medium volume or intermediate volume automakers, and we go down the list: Jaguar Land Rover, Mitsubishi, Volvo, Subaru. These are all companies, aren't they, John, that have in recent years gone, oh look, here's a plug-in hybrid.
Indeed. I think the odd man out on that list is Mazda, which pretty clearly has moved away from electrification and done, to be fair, an extremely good job at making notably more efficient gasoline vehicles. But Mazda and, to some extent, Subaru are the least well capitalized of this group of automakers. But to your point, you've got announced products. Well, Mitsubishi has theirs on the road in several regions. Range Rover has announced products. Who am I missing? Subaru hasn't actually announced a plug-in yet.
And we've got Volvo, of course, as well.
Volvo,
the X,
right,
X
which has announced a plug-in as well.
Yeah.
And Mazda basically doesn't have anything at all.
It just strikes me, though, John, is these are car companies who've come out and gone, hey, look, we're going to be making a plug-in hybrid. Wouldn't this be great? And now they suddenly would like the CARB rules changed so that car is all they have to do. I mean, that's without my journalist hat on. That's with my skeptic kind of tinfoil hat on.
I think you can argue that any car company with any amount of sense understands that they're going to have an electric or partially electric vehicle of some sort at some point in the next 10 years. In order to meet the carbon limits or fuel economy requirements in Europe, China, Asia, and North America, you're going to have some number of them. And so they are doing the long-term research, at least to understand this, for most of them, whether or not they announce products, and more to Chelsea's point, whether or not there are any significant numbers of those products. The Outlander plug-in hybrid has been delayed here a few times, in part because I tend to think they're simply making more money on them, selling them in Asia and Europe than they could be here. That's certainly the case for a number of other electrified vehicles. But sooner or later, some of these will arrive. But it's important to understand that auto companies reflexively fight any regulation on any part of their product or process, like dinosaurs. Poke a dinosaur, the dinosaur latches out. And car companies do this. Let us remember they fought seatbelts aggressively by proposing that you would be trapped in your car and drown or burn to death if you wear a seatbelt. Of course, this is not backed up by the data, but they've fought over 50 years any attempt to regulate emissions, safety, carbon output, fuel economy, and so forth. So they do this potentially almost without thinking. It gets more nuanced in meetings like the CARB meeting, but at all levels of government, the auto companies are there saying how dreadful it will be, how destructive it will be, and how awful for consumers it will be if any new regulation is passed. And you just sort of have to keep that in mind. It's what they do, or it's more appropriately, it's what their lawyers and lobbyists are paid to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, on that, kind of tying up nicely with this particular bow of this particular segment, Chelsea, when do we expect a ruling?
Well,
do we expect a ruling?
We do expect a ruling, and in theory, it could come back, and is likely to come back, that piece of it, to the December board meeting.
Right.
It is also possible that there could be a special meeting and whatnot, so we're all kind of waiting to hear for sure, but the expectation is that it and a couple other decisions, one on battery swapping credit and some other stuff, will probably ramp back up in December, which is nice because it gives people time to have influence on the conversation, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as long as minor and wonky and trivial as some of these things seem, it does have direct impact on what programs actually come to market and where. So, we debate, you give up 1,000 cars or whatever, that's nothing. Well, it's not, but if it gets rid of an entire program, or it means a program won't go to the Northeast or won't go outside California or whatever, then that is, in fact, something to debate about. So, because it's complicated, time to influence is never bad.
What I would like to see, and I'm really interested in this, because I think we're just about at a tipping point now where some car companies are making these cars now not just for the credits. They're making these cars because they don't want to miss out, or because they see a market there. I'm going to stick my neck out here and say I think Volkswagen is among those group. That group of car makers who's come along and gone, ooh, yeah, we should do that too. And we need to beat who's currently there. So they've lagged behind. They've watched what's going on, and now I think they're readying up. And we'll come to Volkswagen in a minute. But it'd be interesting to see what happens with that. John, before we forget, you wrote a very fantastic article. It was last week, actually, week before last, about 10 questions. 10 questions to ask the various hydrogen fuel cell manufacturers. So that'll be Toyota and Honda. John, would you like to run us through that?
Sure. I won't go down all 10 questions. This is where I put in a shameless plug to go to Green Car Reports and dial in 10 questions for Toyota and read the article. But it was an interesting genesis for an article. It came out of an informal discussion with a new PR person at one of those makers who sort of sat me down and tried to pick my brain. And I said, look, you have this hydrogen fuel cell car coming up. There are going to be perhaps a couple of dozen stations. It will only sell in Southern California. And there is, to be politic about it, a certain amount of skepticism amongst the die-hard electric car enthusiasts about hydrogen as a vehicle fuel and fuel cell vehicles as viable products in the market. And he looked baffled and confused, and I ended up volunteering, look, I'll send you 10 questions that you lot have to be prepared to respond to when you roll this thing out. And never being one to waste words, I then turned it into an article. And rather to my surprise, 2 of the 3 makers said, yes, absolutely, we will give you proper responses to this. And the just indicated on Friday that they would do the same. I don't know what it will come out like. I don't know if it'll all go question by question and sort of compare and contrast or what. But they take these concerns seriously, and a sampling would be sort of what's the greenhouse gas carbon burden of a mile driven on a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle where you use electrolysis using the same grid mix as using that power just to recharge an electric vehicle. And, you know, who is going to see a profit potential in rolling out hydrogen as a vehicle fuel nationally, or at least in the 48 states, and so on and so forth. Well, a lot of questions, some of them very wonky, but it generated quite a lot of discussion, and the predictable amount of hydrogen fuel cells are a dodge, a ruse, and won't work. Or as we used to say in activist days, it's a lie, it's a sham, and it won't work. In comments.
Well, I mean, we've got a link. We've got a link in the show notes, and it is a very good article, and it is a very good discussion as well. And with your permission, John, I'm going to pinch some of your questions. I'm going to Swindon, which is 40 miles down the road from me, on Thursday, to the opening of Honda's latest hydrogen-related thing. It's an electrolysis plant. So I'm going to pinch some of your questions and throw at the UK Honda team and see what their responses are.
Take notes and get them to respond in writing as well.
I will do. Moving on then. 2 final stories to the segment. The Volkswagen e-Golf. I did kind of hint that I was going to be talking about this today. Volkswagen e-Golf got rated recently by the EPA. And the EPA ratings, we should note, of course, EPA ratings aren't actually tested by the EPA in most situations. This is the automaker testing them according to the acknowledged standards. They then send the figures to the EPA, and the EPA kind of looks at them and goes, yeah, it looks about right. Sometimes they decide to actually examine them and revise them. Those who are watching this week will know that Mini, BMW was forced to change some of the ratings, wasn't it, John, on the BMW, on the Mini, can't remember which Minis it was.
I believe it's the new 2015 model.
The new
Ford with 6 models and 1 model prior, and Hyundai and Kia as well.
I've had to do it as well. Well, the Volkswagen e-Golf, according to the EPA figures, 83 miles of range in EV mode. It's got a 200 watt-hour advantage on the Nissan Leaf in terms of battery capacity. It's 24.2 kilowatt hours versus 24 kilowatt hours. I don't know what the usable is. That's negligible, so let's just say it's the same. The Leaf is 1 mile more in range, John?
I believe, yes.
Yep, and then it's 116 mpge. Now, this is why I'm excited. And Chelsea, I don't know if you agree with me here or not, but the e-Golf is pretty much the same price as the Nissan Leaf, or comes into Nissan Leaf territory. Also, Ford this week, there's rumours. Ford hasn't actually confirmed it, but there are rumours via Left Lane News. Have they now confirmed, John?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So the price drop for the 2015 Ford Focus Electric, $29,995. All those 3 cars now. You've got the Leaf, you've got the e-Golf, and you've got the Ford Focus Electric. Those 3 cars, in terms of size, there's not much difference between them. I think the e-Golf is classed as a subcompact. The Leaf just nudges into the next category, doesn't it, John?
They're all viewed as roughly the same category.
Yeah, but this is going to be a battleground now, Chelsea, right? Provided people can actually get the cars.
Well, I mean, it's the last half of the statement is the important one. There has for some time been the ability, at least in California, to get a handful of plug-in cars, $99 a month thereabouts, or somewhere in the $20,000, $20,000 to $30,000 range. We have had a handful of relatively economical EVs and plug-in hybrids for a while. That does not mean that these companies are going to put the effort behind it, that they get outside of California, that they're available in unconstricted volumes, on and on and on and on and on. So, Volkswagen remains to be seen. Per the CARB conversation, I'm glad you think they're sincere. I don't know yet. They have not been visible enough in the U.S. to say. They came to National Plug-in Day and stuff, and that was a little bit sketchy in the experience. Whether or not they're serious and get these things out there in volume and train their dealers and all these other things matters actually more than the price, and it always has, and it still does. So, seeing more cars and their prices drop is nice, but that's actually never been our biggest problem.
Yeah,
I would agree with that, and I would also add the Kia Soul EV. They've actually sold the first one in this country now. I've been trying to get that story, but it's worth pointing out that one's rated at 93 miles.
Yes.
And it has somewhat more utility in terms of being a tall wagon than...
It's getting a good reaction.
Although I believe it's...
reaction, and Hyundai and Kia are very, very, very competitive companies.
Yeah.
The newest of the really huge global automakers. Toyota is said to fear Hyundai more than any other company in the world, certainly more than Volkswagen or GM. And... it may be that they want to put a stake in the ground and say, you know what, we can do EVs just as well as anyone else. Again, it'll come down to volume.
Yeah.
In terms of the Focus Electric, though, let's be real. Despite my handful of Focus Electric owning readers who fight back viciously every time I suggest it's a compliance car.
It is a compliance car, John. It is. Let's all agree.
Well, and to be clear, Volkswagen, BMW, and Hyundai Kia are all in a class for CARB where they just are entering into this large vehicle manufacturer. So they're smaller than the GMs of the world, and they're bigger than the Mitsubishis we discussed earlier. They have much bigger obligations in this 2015 to 2018 phase. So all of these are, to a certain extent, compliance-driven. What remains to be seen is if they extend beyond that.
Yeah.
But let's not pretend this is entirely a sincere, we truly believe in electric cars kind of effort.
I don't know. I've been seeing some signs from Volkswagen lately, just kind of throwaway comments that made me go, okay. I mean, Volkswagen's admitted we are still looking into hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, for example. I mean, I've been at several Volkswagen events this year, and in discussing it with top brass, the message is we are not looking at this seriously, but we're keeping an eye on it just in case there's a major breakthrough that means that we have to. And
that's fine, but it's still a matter of what they do, not what they say.
Yes, you're quite right.
Every maker now has to be able to make cars that plug in, and Volkswagen fully intends to be the largest automaker in the world by 2018. That's an announced goal, larger than GM, larger than Toyota, and they want to be able to queue up every single powertrain technology that's available globally and mix and match them. They, like Ford, tend to cast it as we will let the consumer make the choice, which rather sidesteps the obvious issue that you need to make the cars available, and in many cases you really need to educate the consumer as to why one type of car is better than another. But, we've seen for 2 months now 1,000 BMW i3s a month sold in this country, which is a remarkable number. I think all of us will be interested in seeing if that continues for, let's say, 6 more months, because if it does, that firmly puts BMW into the category of makers who are really, really serious about electric cars. Volkswagen, Hyundai, TBD.
And we've heard some rumours about BMW, which we'll come to later on the show. But now it's time for our ad break. And if you haven't yet thought about donating to Transport Evolve, please do. This is the Transport Evolve website, sideways on my iPad. There you go. And at the bottom of the page, right down here somewhere, you'll see it has a donate link. If you click on that donate link, and then you can choose one of the following charge amounts. You can choose to donate £5 a month, £10 a month, £20 a month, or £40 a month. Someone did ask us to add the £40 a month because they felt the other ones were too low. So I'm very grateful to that person. They know who they are. And they do help us every month with the cost of running the servers, running the computers, keeping the site running. If those of you who were watching the show last week, go back in my Twitter stream. During the show, I tweeted a picture of what it looks like when I'm doing a show with all the cameras and all the computers and everything else, and you just get an idea of what's involved in making this show. I also did also shared this earlier on today, which is my my little script to tell me the list of things that I have to do in order to make the show work. So lots of tech, lots of equipment, and lots of money needs to go into making the show, and you can help by going to www.transportevolved.com and clicking on the donate button. If you want to make a one-off donation, do get in touch on yet. But if you want to pay via Bitcoin, you can also do that, because cybercurrency, certainly at the moment, seems to be rocking. Back to the rest of the show. Now, when I looked at the show notes for today, I made a conscious decision to get John on and also Chelsea on, because we're being wonks today. There is no other way of putting this. This week has felt like an old-fashioned, old-school Rumble in the Jungle 2002 edition of Transport Evolved. We are, in some ways, tackling the same kind of challenges. Automakers not necessarily wanting to make EVs. Companies... governments not necessarily being that happy about EVs, not understanding how they work, auto dealers not liking the way that EVs work, not wanting to sell them, and in Michigan, not wanting to sell them full stop. Now, John, you covered this first this week. There is a law that's just been signed in. It was SB 6505 in the state of Michigan. And it was a bill that was originally designed, wasn't it, to change the way that auto dealers can add on fees to their cars at point of sale. So it was originally a bill, as I understand it, that gave auto dealers the thumbs up to tack on extra costs to buying a car. But then somebody changed the wording of the bill, and removed a possessive pronoun, and it made a whole world of hurt for Tesla. John, would you like to take over?
Indeed. The original intent of the bill, and state franchise laws in general, get tweaked numerous times. It's the sort of bill that gets passed without anyone, including State House reporters, really taking notice in most cases. In this case, it started out as, I believe, removing the ability of the automakers to cap add-on fees that dealers can add. But I must admit, I didn't read it closely. They removed the word "its" from existing franchise law in Michigan, which previously had, as almost all of these laws did originally and started out, prohibited automakers from selling cars directly in competition with their franchise dealers. Dealers having the view that while they recognize that automakers would like to take back the sales process in many cases, for all of the reasons that people don't like to go to car dealerships, the automakers could in fact compete with them and drive them out of business if they were to put their minds to it, because they could sell cars to themselves cheaper and so undercut the dealers. Those laws have been established for quite a while. They simply removed the word "its" so that instead of saying a car maker may not sell cars directly to compete with its franchise dealers, it now says car makers may not sell cars directly to compete with franchise dealers, period. So the removal of 3 letters in one space essentially precludes Tesla from selling cars in Michigan, or selling them and delivering them, because I doubt the state will go in and look at the people who actually buy a car in Michigan over their personal computers. It plays out in the same way that many such bills have done in other states, this one being particularly egregious because that change was not seen by the public before the bill passed at all. And it was called by one university professor who follows Michigan politics, let me get the quote right here, it was called corrupt politics at its worst.
Yeah.
Needless to say, Governor Rick Snyder signed it, despite professed free market principles. And I think the wrap-up of this is that car dealers and their state and federal lobbyists seem to be terribly delicate, fragile little blossoms today. They are deeply hurt by any and all criticism of the fact that people may not like them. They want to make the case that laws mandating that they are the only way to buy a new car in the U.S. Are for the good of the consumer, even if the consumer isn't quite smart enough to recognize it. And they are continuing an all-out onslaught on Tesla, really.
Now let's go back in history and tell. We had a video that came out from the North American Auto Dealers Association earlier this year. That was a cartoon, that was an infomercial talking about why you'd want to buy your car from dealers and how it was far better to buy your car from a dealer than someone like a mean old Tesla. They didn't use Tesla by name, but that's clearly who they were talking about. The interesting thing, though, here, isn't it, Chelsea, is that the senator who modified the language of the bill at the last minute, before it was due to go to vote, has listed as one of his principal campaign sponsors the Michigan Auto Dealer Association. What's more, his wife openly lobbies for the same organisation. What's going on, Chelsea?
You cannot possibly be suggesting that there are conflicts of interest in politics.
I'm shocked.
You see, I know that this is just like, and I must admit, the more I watch, because I obviously, as many people who have a Netflix subscription, I've been watching House of Cards, the new version of House of Cards, and as I watch Kevin Spacey and his character go through the motions on television, and then I watch Rachel Maddow, or I watch Fox News, or I watch whoever else, or I watch the news channel in the UK, I think, wow, this is actually quite close to life. John, do you think there'll be any... Or is this going to just go unnoticed? Is this going to be Tesla's in?
I'm not going to predict that. I think that there are sort of two things. Dealers were at least smarter than Iowa dealers, whose representative talking to the news media was foolish enough to say, in effect, if you allow Tesla to sell cars to Iowa citizens directly, it'll be terrible. It'll be like them buying Apple products at stores.
That was brilliant.
to which the general reaction was, yes, that's precisely what we're talking about. Because actually, people rather like buying expensive products for fixed, previously publicized prices. The upshot of all of this is that there are many more people in this country now who are becoming aware of these laws that essentially mandate that dealers be inserted in the sales process. Very few like bargaining or haggling. The article we just did, Edmunds, which reviews cars and sells leads to dealers and so forth, put out some videos for a fixed price guarantee product that they offer. And they essentially made fun of the process of negotiating by having unsuspecting shoppers asked to negotiate the price of each grocery item at the checkout. All right, so I want to charge you $8 for these carrots. You only want to pay $2? Well, how about $7? And so on and so forth. The dealers were so furious at the idea that it was haggling, which is entirely the wrong word. It's actually negotiating, which is a good thing for consumers, according to dealers, that they had Edmunds yank the videos.
Wow.
Delicate and fragile flower issue. But many, many more people are realizing that auto dealers have paid lobbyists for half a century to legislate that they be mandated as the only way to buy a car. And I think increasingly people are thinking, that's not right.
Yeah. I'm going to just refer people, again, I know this, I always do this when it comes up, but This American Life, Public Radio International, from Chicago. Americans.
Yeah.
They did a thing couple of earlier this year, actually. No, it's last year. Episode 129. It was called Cars. A dealership. I believe, John, it was in New York State. And followed their side of things. Just the strange mind tricks that are played both on consumers and also on the dealerships and also on, it's just this weird control freak thing going on. It's worth listening to if you haven't heard it before. I'm going to play now Governor Rick Snyder's video that accompanied the signing of the bill. Just before the bill was signed into law, he had until he signed it at the last minute, essentially. Tesla tried to get its suppliers, who are a lot of them are based in Michigan, to write directly to the governor to stop him from signing it. He ended up signing it. This is his kind of "I've signed the bill" video. I'm going to play it in its entirety, and I'd like your thoughts on it.
Today I signed House Bill 5606. This bill has generated a lot of interest because a number of people have a concern it might be limiting products coming into the state of Michigan. Well, first of all, based on our research, it doesn't change current law at all. It merely strengthens existing language, and it had very strong legislative support. The House vote was 106-1, the Senate vote was 38-0. Given that it didn't change existing law and the strong support from the legislature, I believe it was appropriate to sign it. But given all the concerns mentioned by people, I'm also putting a letter with my bill signing saying that I would be open and actually encourage a discussion to make sure Michigan's viewed as a state that's open to products and services from all over the globe. And I hope they'll take up that concern and have a discussion in the future about what could be the best answers for Michigan's citizens.
So what do we think of that? Is that sincere or is that just boilerplate, Chelsea?
I don't think much of it.
You don't think much of it? John?
I don't think he says anything.
No, he doesn't. I was kind of curious as to why he did it in the first place. Presumably he doesn't do that for every bill. John?
I think it's remarkable, actually, that he did it and that he surfaced the worry that Michigan, which is the heart of the global auto industry in this country, surfaced the worry that, in fact, by doing this, Michigan is further cementing its reputation as a culturally backward, resistant to change place that is not friendly to innovations and people who are interested in those innovations that take place far earlier in other more coastal states.
Let's move on. Staying with Tesla, this is kind of a Tesla section here. But before we leave this one completely, GM supported this bill. GM actually wrote to the legislature in support of the bill. Chelsea, why is GM so scared of Tesla's sales model?
I don't know if they're scared per se of Tesla's sales model or they're caving to the dealers, but quirkier aspects of the story to me because it's the second time GM alone has specifically weighed in on one of these battles. They also did it in New Jersey. So they are not only weighing in, they're weighing in on some of the highest profile franchise battles and on a topic that can hurt them because, of course, it became bigger news than it otherwise would have been that GM was the one that weighed in, and it just makes people, that much more conspiracy minded about GM and electric cars and, sort of revamps all the history. So it's not something that can possibly benefit them. It's got to be some other, we're trying to cater to our dealer sort of reason. And the tone which they always take is interesting because it's kind of like, if they're not pro-dealer in their messaging either, it's kind of like, well, if we have to deal with our own dealers, then Tesla should have to deal with them too. Yeah, if they're going to be a pain in the ass, they should be a pain to everybody. But I don't see how they win here.
It's also interesting. I think I'm right in saying that New Jersey and Michigan are both election states this time, aren't they? I'm afraid my American politics is not that high. Is not that good. I had a suspicion that they were both having elections this coming month. All right.
Everybody is.
Moving on.
But yeah.
All right. So Daimler sold Tesla stock this week. Its final bit of Tesla stock. And this is a story that goes back to 2009 when it was on its knees. I think it had just started delivering the Roadster. Elon Musk is now, retrospectively, has been very open about this and said, look, we were down to our last few dollars. And Daimler came along. They purchased 10%, just under 10% in Tesla Motors. Daimler reportedly paid 50 million. Is that right, John?
Yep.
About that, $50 million. It then almost immediately sold off some of that to an Abu Dhabi investment company. And it then, who also, by the way, happened to have an investment in Daimler. Then a little bit later, it was in 2012, some of those shares were transferred to that same company who'd previously purchased a part of the Tesla shares. But now the final bit of shares in Tesla that Daimler have been sold for $780 million. Same week, Toyota admits it too has sold Tesla stock. I know that Tesla stock is really, really super duper overweight. I am not a stock analyst. I'm not a financial advisor. But even at Elon Musk's own admission, Tesla stock is really, really overweight right now. And it has been sort of gradually ticking down as far as I can make out. It looks like it might be adjusting itself. Are these the actions of two automakers who are trying to cash in on Tesla's popularity and overweight share price, or is there something else going on that we do not know about, John?
I think I would probably put it down to, you know what? Company's been up there for a long time. It recently took about a 15 or 20% hit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is a good time to realize these unrealized profits.
Yeah.
And Daimler also had language both reassuring people that existing collaborations were going on and saying at the same time that it no longer needed Tesla to be able to build plug-in electric vehicles. And that may well be true. 2009 is a long time ago now in that field.
Yeah.
And I think Toyota may have felt the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes the logical sense. There's a rumor. I don't think it's been confirmed yet, so I want to be very careful about saying this is a rumor, unless someone has confirmed it and I've missed it. That BMW has jumped in to Daimler's position and bought some Tesla shares. As far as I'm aware, John, it's still a rumor. But do you think that's likely?
I don't see where the business logic is in that, although I'd be curious to hear what you think, Chelsea. I mean, BMW sells at something like 1.5 multiple, and Tesla's is 10 times or more that. Why would BMW, which has by far the most aggressive electric car program of the three Germans, and plans for multiple additional models already, why would they buy Tesla? What would they get out of Tesla? It doesn't make sense to me either financially or sort of structurally. But what do you think, Chelsea?
I completely agree. I mean, there's no obvious reason for them to purely buy stock, and yet there's also not an obvious reason for a partnership necessarily, or at least they seem like they would need a partnership the least. Those that have partnered with Tesla needed Tesla to help build a car and sort of, make their compliance and whatnot, and BMW doesn't appear to be in a position that is desperate for that collaboration. At the same time, in terms of the sales, if you look at the horizon of Tesla and what the stock kind of does, it does a lot of up and down for seemingly trivial reasons and because Elon tweeted that day. But the next really substantive thing on their horizon, now that Gigafactory's been established, is going to be Model X. The best is going to be many months away. So I think it probably is as much, you know what, the stock's at a nice price. It's going to be a while in stockholding terms in Tesla's life until we have another potential pop based on something substantive. Now's as good a time as any to take this profit that we have made, and it doesn't keep them from partnering with Tesla again and paying whatever that partnership price is. But when you have hundreds of millions in profit in the meantime, why not take them?
Yeah, makes sense. And also a link there, very nicely done, Chelsea, to the Model X. There has been an analyst this week, John, saying that he thinks there's a reasonable risk of Tesla delaying the Model X to late 2015. There are some suggestions based on the fact that we haven't actually seen any pre-production validation vehicles really on the road yet, but that doesn't necessarily mean there aren't any. We haven't seen a great deal of spy shots, let's put it like that, of the Model X, which one would expect. But then on the other hand, we've just had the dual motor drive option for the Model S unveiled, and I suspect that's essentially Model X technology, isn't it? So which way is it going? Do you think it's going to be delayed, or?
I think it'll be delayed, yeah. I mean, there is a cadence to these sorts of things. Tesla doesn't conventionally show at auto shows or make announcements at auto shows. They do their own events. I believe Musk is on the program somewhere for the Detroit Auto Show in January. Maybe they changed their mind, I don't know. But the fact that we haven't seen the merest hint of a production-ready Model X for a car that theoretically is going into production in 6 months or less would seem to indicate that taking their time developing it. And as I think I've said before, I rather suspect range issues. That car is bigger, heavier, and has a much greater cross-sectional area than the Model X. It's also got all-wheel drive, and I think they have to get range somewhere between 208 and 265 miles, and that may be proving a bit of a challenge. I don't know.
Yeah. And you know, from a practical point of view, you know, exactly what you say. It's normally, you know, it can be as much as a year, can't it? From those final prototype vehicles to production ready to production test run vehicles. What do you call them? The validation vehicles, Chelsea.
Validation prototypes.
Yeah. And
Tesla's always called them.
Yeah, I mean, we know that Tesla is quick. We know that Tesla is quick at implementing change because it doesn't operate in the same way as a traditional automaker. But it's going to be, I think it's going to be a challenge to bring it around in that time. Finally, for the segment, Model S owners, most of them that I have spoken to, are absolutely blown away by Tesla's announcement from 2 weeks ago about the autonomous drive and the dual motor options for the Model S. I know several people who watch or listen to this show who have a Model S who have been openly talking about trading their Model S in for a new model. Some of them, I think, have probably even placed a deposit. And people who are very excited about the autonomous drive features of the Model S. And I've had conversations with people this week going, okay, well, yeah, if you can afford it, maybe this is the car to go forward because, you know, this car will be upgradable in a way that conventional cars won't be. But a small group, and I am going to say a small because it's sub 1,000, of Tesla Model S owners are pissed at Tesla. They are moaning at Tesla and saying, look, you guys need to make autonomous drive a retrofit option for the Model S. We've supported Tesla since the early days. What's going on? And they've actually put a petition out on the internet calling for Tesla to do that. Personally, I think that is pushing things a little bit too far. I think it's impractical and it's really, really costly and improbable to do, isn't it, John? I mean, the technology involved.
It sounds to me like you probably have to replace some or all of the car's wiring loom in order to incorporate the additional sensors and cameras and whatnot.
Completely new braking system as well, a new steering system?
Not sure about that.
Right.
That might be programming, can't tell.
Right.
But, you know, it's a lovely idea to call on Tesla to be different from the rest of the industry. And yes, remembering early adopters, if Tesla were to offer this, I have to think this would be a 5-figure upgrade. And look, you buy a car at a certain point in time, you get what you get, things change. You get more features. I just don't see this happening. I don't see enough upside to Tesla to prioritize this among all of the many, many, many big challenges it has.
And there's also, of course, the challenge of value. Any car depreciates the minute you drive it off the lot. Now, Tesla's trying to beat that with its guaranteed resale value program. But at the end of the day, these cars will depreciate. And so there becomes a point at which adding, as you say, a 5-figure sum to upgrade a car to the latest technology is just not practical or cost effective, and it's better to sell your car, trade it in for a new one. All right. Now we're going to have our final ad break, and then we're on to the final segment, which is nice and short. And we've kind of covered the meaty subject so far, and I'll make the ad short as well. If you have watched Transport Evolved for a while, you'll notice that I wear a little shirt with a Transport Evolved logo on. And if you'd like a little shirt with a Transport Evolved logo on, you can buy one all of your very own by going to www.transportevolved.com and following the link on the top of the page for the shop. And we've partnered with a great provider to give you Transport Evolved swag, basically. And reasonable prices. You buy directly from the company, and they send direct to you return post. And you can have anything from iPhone camera cases, you can have coasters, you can have baby grows, tote bags, hats, you can have hoodies, pretty much anything. And I've seen the Transport Evolved logo out and about now in quite a few locations. I don't know if either of you have seen them yet, people wearing them in locations, but I've seen photographs, people sending them from all over the world wearing Transport Evolved logos. And the point behind this is that when you buy a Transport Evolved logo, we get a little bit of something back from the t-shirt company, but we also get to spread the word about the show. And I've had half a dozen people now email me and go, I found out about your show by seeing someone wearing a t-shirt with Transport Evolved on. So it works. Please do support us. Thank you. All right, on to the final segment. I'm going to play you a video now, and if I've done my work properly, this video will be quiet and there won't be any sound on it, and I can talk over the top. This is the Audi RS7 piloted driving prototype blitzing round the Hokenhiemring in Germany, and I really do mean absolutely hammering. 150 mile an hour top speed, nails pretty much every corner, every apex, every braking point. There's not a single person in the car. This is let's be honest, this is nothing but an Audi demonstration of its autonomous drive or piloted driving program. It's a publicity stunt, but hey, John, it generated a lot of publicity, didn't it?
Yes. All the Germans now are competing to sort of one-up each other in piloted driving or self-driving cars, or however you choose to term them, in part, I think, because they got caught slightly when Google started to get a lot of publicity several years ago. And the idea is close enough, I think, that people are starting to get interested and think, how could this apply to my life?
Now, Chelsea, obviously, Silicon Valley, Google were the ones who kind of kicked this all off with the Toyota Prius, but sort of piloted driving or autonomous driving can be anything from an EV to a conventional gasoline car, can't it? And it has benefits.
It certainly can, although it seems that in my observation, most that are really into the autonomous driving are also assuming it's going to be largely an electrified vehicle.
Right. So we've seen GM do it with their little. We've seen Renault do it with their Zoes, and they've also done it with the Fluence. We've seen Nissan do it, obviously, in Japan. Chelsea, have you been in an autonomous vehicle?
I have not.
And John, have you been in one yet?
I've been in test vehicles that have elements of autonomy. They'll correct lanes. They'll sort of automatically stop. They'll change lanes if someone steps out in front of them. But I've never been in a completely driverless car that has all of that wrapped in together.
And let's be honest, this is not something that's going to appear in the marketplace next year, is it? I think even Tesla's saying, yeah, we're going to start off with the autonomous drive features and we're going to slowly roll them out. I was at an event recently in the UK where I was talking to Georg Eli from Tesla, and he was saying, yeah, we're going to do all this autonomous driving. And I said, well, what about the logistical legislative nightmare that exists? He said, well, we're rolling this out with help. We're not going to just turn it on overnight. But it's going to be a minefield, isn't it, Chelsea? I mean, you think about the trouble that CARB is getting into, trying to sort out zero-emission mandates. This is nothing compared to the nightmare of autonomous driving, is it?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to ultimately happen slowly and incrementally for marketing reasons. I mean, as John said, you'll have features in the cars before we see fully autonomous cars, but not unlike the space tourism industry after X Prize and everyone decided they wanted to go to space privately. the FAA had to deal with that and is still dealing with that. There will be similar policy minefields to negotiate for this. So it will ultimately, I think, become a policy conversation more than a technology conversation. Yeah. And that will determine the pace of things. And as we know, policy doesn't tend to move quickly.
And of course, in the UK now, or in Europe, you now have to have lane departure warning or lane control assist. It is now standard, or will be standard across Europe. It's one of the reasons why Tesla rolled it out in the Model S in Europe with a camera behind the mirror. That was what it gave. John, the NHTSA are going to have to work with the auto industry very carefully on this subject, aren't they?
They are, and NHTSA's already got some initial study data which is starting to feed back into policy recommendations. We now have a few years worth of data on some of these systems, be they automatic emergency braking, if the driver doesn't brake and the car sees an object in front of it. We have data from rear view cameras and so on, and they can compare cars and accident rates with that equipment versus the same model without. It's looking increasingly likely that rear view cameras will be mandated in the US within the next handful of years, and probably after that, automatic crash braking, which below a certain level will prevent you from slamming into something, and above that speed will vastly reduce the closing velocity, and so reduce injury and damage. Simply because the early data seem to show that both of those things actually do work.
They do. I'm talking about rear view cameras, and I saw, I think it was Nissan demoing a vehicle recently that had a rear view monitor replacing the interior rear view mirror. And I looked at it and thought, wow, that's cool. And then I looked at it and I thought, no, it's not. Because as a mum, I'm driving down the road. I want to actually see what's going on in the back of my car as well as what's going on behind my car. So, Nissan, all the other car companies who are listening, make sure that if you do implement these little cameras that feed an image from the rear bumper to that mirror, make sure that people can also see in the back of their car. Because as a mum, I would much rather look up than actually turn around, and I reckon that would be just as dangerous. All right, moving on. We're back to CARB, Chelsea. They published this week, CARB published this week, its 2013-2014 manufacturer credit thing. I'm going to call it the credit thing, because let's face it, credits are effectively an arbitrary measurement, aren't they, of how many green vehicles a company has either produced or sold to offset the rest of its fleet.
They're arbitrary in that because automakers can reach a total number of credits through a variety of different paths, it's impossible to have an exact vehicle to credit ratio.
Right.
When you look at the total.
And so these balance sheets that were published this week give us an idea as to which automakers have been selling off excess credits, which ones have been buying credits, and where those credits have been going. There are some interesting things here. In previous years, Tesla was kind of the top of the credits list because Tesla only makes electric vehicles, and therefore it had more credits than it really needed. This year, it's Nissan. And Nissan have obviously just pipped Tesla to the post. But the interesting thing is there were some in and out transfers which tell us that certain car companies were not quite making the number of vehicles they wanted. It didn't tell us who bought the credits, but I think it was, I'm just checking my notes here, Nissan and Mercedes-Benz. Nissan sold the same number of credits as Mercedes-Benz transferred in. So is that where we think the credits went, Chelsea?
It's possible. I actually, I've looked at the totals and stuff. I've not tried to analyze who exactly bought from whom, but we certainly have seen, I mean, Tesla doesn't have a credit requirement at all. So they're not really at issue here. They can sell as many as they want, but they don't have to retain any.
Because they're a small volume, right? Because they're still
they're a small volume manufacturer, and all they make are EVs. So they're not trying. They don't have no obligation to compensate for X number of gas cars sold in California, which is really what the others are doing. At the same time, while Tesla has always sold and they've always found buyers, we are starting to see, and I've heard from a couple that they, even if they need to buy credits, they do not want to sell. Just they're just standing on their own sort of
This is just
principle.
like-
We'd rather buy them from somebody else than Tesla. So fine. So they buy them from Nissan or whomever. What is also just as interesting is not who's buying and selling, but those balances. If you look at the balances, you can see who is going to have to make cars sooner than later, and who has kind of a little credit bank to sit upon, because if they don't fall short or they choose not to produce, they simply start using up that bank of credits. And that's been a kind of a talking point over the years, because some companies have amassed so many credits in the early days because they get more credits if they build earlier than they have to, and all the different little layers that go into how many credits each car gets.
Yeah.
There are companies that don't have to build anything for 3 or 4 years
So
because they
Nissan-
just have this lofty bank of credits.
So Nissan
Now-
are one, aren't they? Nissan have got a
Well,
huge number. Not Nissan,
but they're all-
Honda. Honda, sorry.
They have a huge number, but they also, you can't just look at the big numbers and say, oh, these people are all the ones that don't have to build, because the larger companies also have to amass more credits in the first place, so they would run through their bank more quickly, and there's some of those layers too. But there is some evidence that helps illustrate this notion of who needs to build when and how many, and who can kind of afford to sit back and wait and see what happens with regulations, and maybe the obligations get smaller, and all the little gamesmanship that goes on. But we've been fighting for years and years to get CARB to release this information, because this has always been going on behind the scenes.
Yep.
And even though we don't have 100% of the information of who exactly is buying from whom, we do at least know sort of who's buying and selling, what those balances are, more importantly.
John, it's all very inside baseball, isn't it? But it's very
Yes.
essential.
Yes, because it does matter whether or not you will be able to buy a battery electric vehicle at your local fill-in-the-blank dealer, or you'll have to wait 2 or 3 years for that vehicle.
Yeah. All right, moving on. This is incredible, and I like your opinions on it. I know you're not in the UK, but I know that you both know enough about the UK market to at least give me something on this. After 3 years of extremely low plug-in vehicle sales, and I mean extremely low plug-in vehicle sales, Q3 of 2014 literally blew the scale of the charts. UK plug-in grant scheme in Q3 this year awarded 5,000 plug-in vehicle grants in the UK. Now, depending on whether those are for vehicles or for vans, the maximum amount available to cars is £5,000. If it's a commercial vehicle, it's 8. But applications, 5,000 applications in Q3, which accounts for 1/3 of the total number of plug-in grant applications made since the scheme started in 2010. Vehicles that have come to market this year, which I think personally have caused this. You've got the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid. You've got the BMW i3. You've got the Tesla Model S, and then cars like Nissan's ENV200, which have come to market. John, do we think it's just more choice, or do we think Brits are now starting to pay attention?
I think those cars probably had an effect. Clearly, there were a lot of people who were waiting for the Tesla to come to market, and the Outlander is very much the only plug-in hybrid in its category. I would also add a bit of an asterisk that there may also be some either governmental delays or some record-keeping issues. As we look at the U.S. federal income tax credits for purchase of a plug-in vehicle, you see some rather remarkable things. Those numbers, or the totals issued thus far by the IRS, do not match up either to sales of the vehicles, or in some cases to manufacturers that make plug-in vehicles at all. So there may be some questionable record keeping behind it as well. Hopefully British civil servants are better than American ones.
I'm not going to comment on that, because I know someone who was involved in a government contract recently, and I know it wasn't all that great. Right. All right, following on then, the Tucson hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. Limited numbers in California, Chelsea. Have you seen any in the wild yet?
Not a Tucson. I saw a Mercedes fuel cell on the road the other day, which was
interesting.
I think the first time in the wild.
Interesting. Well, over in the UK, Hyundai has just delivered the first 6 hydrogen fuel cell iX35s, which is essentially a rebadged Tucson fuel cell vehicle. So it's crossover SUV. powered by a fuel cell, 100 kilowatts fuel cell on board, 100 kilowatt motor, range of about 265 miles from 12 pounds of compressed hydrogen, John. But the number of places that you can refuel in the UK, I tried figuring it out, and I think it's under 10. I mean, it's worse than California. Most of them around London. There's one at Millbrook Test Facility, which is an industry test facility, isn't it, John, north of London? And it's not a particularly easy place to get into. That's the first thing I'd note. It's not somewhere that you can just rock up and say hello to the security guard and get on with them and get into the secure test facility, because what's Millbrook used for, John?
Testing cars.
Ones that haven't actually come to market yet.
Testing cars that the public are not wanting to see.
Yes, or even automotive journalists. I mean, I've been to Millbrook before and they've gone through my bag. I mean, it's that kind of place. The other place is Honda. They have a hydrogen fuel cell filling station at the factory in Swindon, where they make the European market Civic hatchback. There's one in London at a bus stop. I mean, these are places where you'd not necessarily expect your run-of-the-mill consumer to go and fill up their car with hydrogen. But Hyundai, interestingly, John, would not tell me how much these cars are being leased for.
That's odd.
They wouldn't tell me. They said that's still undisclosed. We're not prepared to talk about that yet. They also said our financing packages haven't been announced.
Ask to put you in touch with an owner.
And yeah,
that is their fleet vehicle.
I think these are just publicity vehicles. That's what I'm going to call it as. How are these vehicles going to catch on, Chelsea?
Well, as John knows, I have some questions as to whether they will. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but particularly at this stage, I have of all of the questions of hydrogen, my biggest ones are about the market and what is going to compel people to want these, other than a very few that will want the novelty and can afford the latest whatever. I just don't see it, particularly when some of the more robust plug-in hybrids offer essentially the same experience that's cheaper and more convenient today without having to wait for your infrastructure.
I'm curious to see how these vehicles are actually going to be refueled in London, because, you know, if this is a car that's got a 265-mile range, you could technically drive it from London to Bristol and back, but then you'd need to fill it up. So you couldn't drive, for example, you can't drive to Manchester with it, because you'd get to Manchester and then you wouldn't be able to get home. So this is like all of the arguments that people use against electric cars, without the ability to turn around and go, yeah, but I can use a 13 amp socket that I have at home, or a household outlet, or a dryer outlet, whichever country you happen to be in. So it's just, and just Hyundai's being about this all, it just worries me. It feels like a technology demonstrator, and that's it. So I'll be interested to see. But finally, Halloween this week, Chelsea.
Yes.
And I would very much love to do the video of the porcupine eating the pumpkin, because it is just so cute. It's on YouTube. There's a pumpkin eating porcupine and it makes all kind of sweet noises, but I can't connect that to EVs or future cars. So my and finally today involves ice and racing. It's also a YouTube video. I think this is great. Now, Chelsea, you like rear-wheel drive electric vehicles, don't you?
I like anything that goes quick.
Quick? Well, this one doesn't go quick per se, but it does accelerate pretty quickly. And it's the easiest car, I think, in history to go sideways. I defy anybody to find a car that drifts this easily in its stock configuration, because it's got a tiny, tiny wheelbase. I give the world, and now I've got to figure out which button it is, I give the world Twizy Ice Racing. This is a ski resort in the French Alps from December, offering people the chance to go ice racing in a Renault Twizy fitted with studded tyres in a little bit of off-piste action. This is just brilliant, John, isn't it?
It is kind of great. I'm actually watching the video here. I would only say in response to your comment that having spent the last week driving best car to buy contenders for our 3 websites, I had the rather interesting experience of driving a 707 horsepower Dodge Challenger Hellcat, which is equally eager to go sideways at the merest provocation.
The only other car I had, and I'm going to say this now because you're on, the only car that I've ever owned that was as eager to go sideways as my Renault Twizy, which I owned for a little while, was a 1.8 litre K-Series engined Morris Minor Traveller with a Type 9 Ford gearbox and the rear back axle of a Ford Escort Mexico. It was limited slip diff, and it would go sideways in second gear. Sideways in second gear because there was just so much rear power going to the rear wheels, and it was such a light little vehicle. And I suspect it's the same with the Dodge, and also, except the Dodge has just got the power, obviously.
Although you have to admit that drifting a car whose back half is made out of ash-framed cabinetry is a special experience.
It is, especially when I used to accelerate in it. I used to really upset my partner because we'd sit at a set of traffic lights and I used to have my hand up on the ash frame between the front of the car, which was metal, and the rear, which is wood, and accelerate, and you'd feel the ash frame stretch as the car accelerated. It was special, very special. And on that note, if you are going skiing, by the way, this winter in France, do check out the Renault Twizy because I want to see someone do it and send me a video, basically, because I can't ski and I'm not even going to try. Thanks for joining us today, Chelsea. Where can people find out about you?
I am Evie Chelsea everywhere.
Everywhere.
Easy to find.
All the places. All the things.
All the places.
Many wow. John, where are you?
www.greencarreports.com. Then John Voelcker on Twitter.
Fantastic. And thanks to everyone for watching today. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on iTunes. And you can find us Monday to Friday at www.transportevolve.com, where we cover the world's future transport news with a plug-in edge. It's probably the best way of putting it, but I'm just going to give you all a warning. This week our output might be a bit lower because I'm going to become a cyborg tomorrow. Yay! I'm not going to go into it now, but yeah. So I'm going into hospital tomorrow. I'll be back on Tuesday, but it does mean that things might be a little quiet this week, and it might mean that there might not be a show on Friday. So apologise in advance if that in fact happens. But I want to go to this hydrogen fuel cell event on Thursday in Swindon, so I'm going to get better very quickly. That really is it, folks. Thanks for joining us. John, Chelsea, stick around for the post-show. And until next week, folks, don't forget to plug in. See you soon. Take care. Bye.